Okay, good morning, class. So today we are going to cover lecture number 2, which is the introduction to garment construction. After finishing this topic, you're going to learn the entire process of constructing a garment. So we are going to learn from the ideation to the final process of finishing and packaging. So you're going to see how garment is being constructed from the idea of sketching to the time where you pack or you buy a garment packed in a packaging, okay? So I invite you to ask as many questions as you can and let us discuss and share this. By starting, we are going to see the overview of garment construction. So what is a garment construction? This is the foundation of any apparel. So apparel is a general term which describes any one item, including the handbag, the accessories, and the shoes. But when it comes to a garment is a single outfit like a shirt, a skirt, or a trouser. So when you say apparel, it means it started with a garment. So when you saw something individual, we call it a garment, but when they are in a collective, we call them apparel. Is that clear? So this is the technique art of transforming a two-dimensional fabric to three-dimensional wearable item. So a fabric is a two-dimension because it has only the width and the length, isn't it? But when you form a garment, you give it a three-dimension. It means you give it a shape. As we can see, this blouse, at first it was a fabric, isn't it? We call it a two-dimension. But once we constructed it into a garment, it got a 3D dimension because we can now wear it and we see the shape of the blouse. So this is a garment. So garment construction is a technical art of transforming a 2D dimensional fabric into a 3D dimensional or wearable item. And so this is the bridge between creative fashion design and industrial manufacturing. So the construction process creates the ideation and the manufacturing process. Is that clear? So for a designer to understand that this process is a very essential because it ensures a vision on the paper and it can enable your vision or the idea to be seen physically. And so when a designer understands the entire process of fashion design or garment construction, he or she can now realize the structure, the idea or the vision which was on the paper to the final product, which has the structure integrity, proper fit, and the professional quality. So once you decide to construct what you're thinking, we can now see your vision on the real thing. So before we proceed, we're going to see terminologies which you're going to hear throughout this process or the entire course of garment construction. And these terminologies, you'll be interacting with them or you'll be using them every day. And once you hear them, know that whenever you interact with the garment construction, you're going to use these terminologies frequently. The very first one is the word dart. So what is the dart? It's a seam that creates a shape in a garment to fit the body. You see from the picture, this is a dart. So whenever you wear a blouse or a skirt or a dress, there is a line coming from either from the bust to the waist, and which shapes the blouse or the dress, is it? So that's what we call a dart. So it has both purpose, the function and decoration. So a functionality is it shapes the garment to fit the person, and another thing is as a decoration. So sometimes we put a dart in a colored form, or we put it in a very funny or very crazy design as a decoration. So once you hear a dart, know that it has both functional and decorative purpose on the garment. Another terminology is apex. This is the highest point of a dart. As I said, a dart starts from the upper part to the lower of the blouse. So where the dart starts has a point. So the highest part of the dart, we call it what? Apex. So you can see from this picture here, where the dart starts, it's a highest point, where it points, it's called apex. And then we have something called burst point. This is the burst area. So the burst point is where the protruding points from this to this. So when you measure a woman wearing a very tight bra, you'll see there is a pointing point from the burst area. So from one point, protruding point to another is what we call a bursting point. Is that clear? So from the picture here, you see the bursting point will be here. You can see from the two pictures, the bursting point. And then we have something called center back and front back, front center, center front and center back of the garment. Whenever you are making a garment, you'll have pieces, the front piece and the back piece, isn't it? And the pieces will be divided into two. So where the center, the line divides the two parts, we call it a center. So we have the center back and center front. So from the two designs, these are pieces of the blouse. So the one with a very deep neck is the front one. The one with the shallow neck is the back piece. So the line here at the center is what we call the center back for the back piece. And the one for the front, we call the front back, the front center. Is that clear? So another terminology is basting. Basting is when we make temporary stitches for holding fabric pieces together before permanent stitching. And this is normally done by hand stitching. You remember on your the assignment of stitching, I gave you back stitch and basting stitch, isn't it? So the basting stitch is a temporary, when you're sewing a delicate area like a neckline or either shoulder or anywhere where we want to get a proper shape, we normally start with a temporary stitch by hand, and then before we put the permanent machine stitch. So the kind of stitch we put for temporary holding, we call it what? Basting. Another is easy. This is the extra room in a garment needed for comfort and movement beyond the body's measurements. As we construct a garment, we never construct a garment which fits exactly to the body measurement. We give it some allowance, isn't it? So the allowance we leave in any garment, we call it easy, to allow movement and comfortability. As imagine if a person could wear a garment which fit properly, so she could not make any movement, isn't it? So the amount we leave to allow this movement or comfortability, we call it what? Good. And then we have something called grading. Grading is a process of increasing or decreasing the size of the pattern to different sizes. When you draft a pattern, you get one pattern of a certain size, isn't it? So normally, for the lay person to make different design, he or she will have to start making various designs, whether big or smaller from what he or she has made, isn't it? But technically, in the fashion field, we use the technology which called grading. You use the same pattern, you grade it into different sizes. So one pattern can create either smaller sizes or big sizes. And this technical process is called what? Grading. So you're going to see the pattern grading. You have to know that it's a process of increasing or decreasing the pattern size in order to get various sizes. And another thing, we have a grain line. A grain line is a direction of the warp or weft thread on the fabric. Any fabric has two sides, the length and the width, isn't it? Yeah. So the length is what we call warp, and the width is what we call what? So the grain line is a direction, whether you want the direction of the weft or the warp. So when you hear about the grain line, know that it's a direction of the fabric. It can be a weft or a warp. Another thing is a hem. Hem is a finished edge at the bottom of the garment. You have seen the dresses or the blouses. You cannot leave them as it is. We do what? the hemming. On your assignment, you have a hemming assignment, isn't it? So the hemming is a finished edge at the bottom of the garment. So that's what we call hemming is a process. By hem is what you do here, isn't it? Yes. Another we call muslin. Muslin is an expensive and dyed fabric used for creating a test garment or a prototype. When you have your idea, you want to make something, we normally don't encourage a designer or a beginner to start from the real fabric. You buy the cheaper fabric and you make the prototype before making the final thing. So the kind of fabric is called muslin. Is that clear? You're going to use it frequently. And then another thing is notches. These are markings on the pattern pieces that help align with the other pieces. The patterns for any garment are in different pieces. You have a sleeve, you have a front piece, you have the back piece, you have maybe the pocket, isn't it? So in order for you to know which piece has to be connected with which piece, we use what we call notches. So you find some small triangles. So you know, oh, this is the point where the sleeve is going to meet the shoulder line. So we use the term notches. And these marks, you'll see them on any pattern in the world. So those marking, we call them what? Notches. And then something is called princess seam. It's a curved seam that extends from the armhole to the waist. These are basically for shaping, but for decoration as well. They start from the armhole to the waist. And these normally shape the blouse or the dress, and sometimes they give it a decorative feature. So if a designer wants this to be more of decoration than the function, they use contrasting colors of the fabric used. Is that clear? Yes. Another thing is a seam allowance. This is the area between the raw edges of the fabric and the seam line. When you construct any garment, we leave an allowance to allow any movement or for a fabric not to raveling. So what we leave, the area between where the stitch passes and the piece left on the fabric, we call it what? Seam allowance. You know this, and you're going to interact with this terminology frequently. Another thing is our sloper. Sloper is a basic pattern piece without any seam or any other allowance. When you're making a pattern, we normally start with a sloper. Sloper is a basic structure of any pattern. So before you integrate it into different sizes or you put any mark, we call that piece a sloper, isn't it? So as we're going to draft a pattern, we normally start with a sloper. So we won't put any mark on or any seam allowance because it's going to be a foundation of any other patterns. Is that clear? Another thing is trims. Trim is a notion or embellishments used in sewing such as buttons and zippers. So when you say that, just add trims. So it's time we're going to do trimming. Trimming is a process where we're going to add some features like a buttons or a zipper or pockets or elastics on a finished garment. In general, we call them what? Trims. So, after you have seen the terminologies, we are now going to see what are the tools required for garment for sewing process. I gave you an assignment, and from the first lecture, we saw the category of tools and equipment needed in a sewing room, isn't it? So you remember the measuring tools, including the measuring tape and the ruler. We use them for measuring or for board measurements process, isn't it? You remember the drafting tools? These are the ones like our squares and hip cut. We use them to draft patterns. Is that clear? And then you have a marking tools like a tailor's chalk or tracing wheels. We use these to put marks on the fabric or on the pattern papers. And then you have a cutting tools. These are shears, scissors, or seam ripper. They're using for what? For cutting. And then you have a sewing tool and equipment, which are like needles, thread, pins, sewing machine, pressing tool, and others. But finally, we have a pressing tools, which are irons and iron board. So for you to finalize or to complete the sewing process effectively, you'll need these tools. Is that clear? Any question? Is there any question? Okay. Now, before we know how to construct a garment, we are going to see the basic structure of any garment. For you to call this is a garment, I told you it had to be joined. You transform from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional, isn't it? What we use to connect the 2-dimensional fabric to 3, we use what is called seam. Seam is a stitch line we put to join two pieces of the fabric together. So you can see that you cannot make any garment without a seam. Okay? So any garment without a seam is just a piece of fabric. Unless you join them, you cannot call it a garment. So what we use is seam is a basic structure of any garment. So what is a seam now? This is the basic structural element of a garment or household textile item. So for it to be called a textile item or garment, you need to use a seam to join the pieces together. Another thing is, it is a means of joining together two pieces of fabric. And then within a seam, you're going to use seam allowance. So when you're joining them, you have to leave some space for movement or to enable the fabric not to raveling. So this is the fabric from the stitching line to the cutting edge. So you cannot really sew the garment from the very angle or from the last selvage area. You leave some space between the fabric edge and the stitching line. So the space is called what? Seam allowance. Types of seams. You've done this in your assignments. Seams are placed where two pieces of fabric are joined by application of series of stitches or stitch type with a definite geometry. The different types of seams, but the basic ones which we use in most common garments are the plain seams, or sometimes we call them open seams. The double stitched seam, as the word states that the double stitch, it means we're going to use double stitch lines. Another thing is a French seam, overlaid seam, flat felt seam, and then you have special seams. These are done for special garment for special occasion. And if you need special features, we're going to use special seams, under which you're going to use maybe hairline seam, lap-D seams, corded or piped, mock French, or welt seams. So if you want to use special seams, it means you need special features from that garment. Is that clear? And now, characteristics of a well-constructed seam. How do we say this seam was well-constructed? There are characteristics we're going to see and say, oh, this seam was made correctly or not. The first one, it should be smooth and even in appearance on the sides, on inside and outside. For a seam to be properly done, or if you want to say whether it was done properly or not, it has to be smooth and even. So there is no any puckering, there is no even any other creases or folding. It has to be even and smooth in appearance. Another, it has to be even in width throughout. It's not like you start from the bottom and then it has a certain width, and then as you go up or go down, it tends to increase or decrease. You have to maintain the width size. Is that clear? And another thing, it has to press open or closed according to the type of seam and how it is used in the construction process. Once you do any seam, you press it for it to be neat and for the final garment to look smart and with a professional finishing. So once we do any seam, we finish, we press as we sew. Another thing is thread should be appropriate to the fabric type and fiber contents, and the color should be matched or should be slightly darker than the fabric. You remember when I was telling how to select a color of the pieces of the paper and the thread? So the color should match with the thread. The color of the thread should match with the fabric or should be slightly darker than the fabric. This will enable any person to view the seam, how the seam was done, and can see the seam. If it will be lighter than the fabric, you cannot really see it. So it has to be slightly darker than the fabric. Another thing should be neat without any added bulk. When you press properly, it won't make any bulk, so it will be smooth and even and neat. And then you should protect the area and prevent the edge from raveling, stretching, or rolling or curling. So the aim of the seam has to protect the area from raveling or rolling. So for you to make it to enable the seam to do its purpose, you have to make it clear from the beginning, from maintaining the distance, the width, and even construction process, and not be visible from the right side of the garment. The seam has to be hidden from the inside. When you're wearing a garment or any cloth, I don't think if you can see any seam, isn't it? The seam should not be seen from the right side. It has to be seen from the wrong side of the garment. Any question? Can you now judge if the seam was done correctly or not? Yeah, so these are the characteristics or the criteria you're going to use to judge a seam if it was done correctly or not. Now, you have seam and then we have seam finishes. What are seam finishes? These are the treatments. These are treatments of raw fabric edges after sewing to prevent fraying, to add neatness, and to increase durability. We add finishes in order to obtain three things: to prevent from fraying the thread, and then to add neatness, and then to increase durability. When you add finishes, you make that garment to be durable, to increase the longevity of the garment. But then you make it look neat. And then once you put finishes, it won't even fray out. The threads won't fray out from the fabric. And then we have some popular methods of seam finishes, but the most common ones are the French seams. You know the French seam? So we use it as a seam finishes. We know flat fell seam. We also use it as a seam finishes. The zigzag stitching, the overlock, the pinking, we're using the pinking shears. And then we have the bias binding. And then we have bound finishes, of which we have different designs. We have a bound with binding, the self-bound seam, the Hong Kong finishing, and other finishes within the bound. So once you want to use a bound finishes, you have options from that categories. Is that clear? So if you want to finish your seam, you can choose which one you're capable of or which one you want to see from the final garment. And these are the most common used methods. How do we select a seam and seam finishes? How do you decide, okay, I want to use a Hong Kong, I want to use bound, I want to use French? There are a number of things to consider or to ask by yourself before concluding that I want to use this kind of seam. One is several factors need to be considered when selecting a seam and seam finishes. One is a fabric. You have to know what nature of the fabric are you dealing with. And you consider its weight, the texture, and composition. You have to know which kind of finishes will enable or will enhance or will sustain kind of fabric. There are some fabrics which when you put a different or an appropriate kind of finishes or seam finishes, it's going to look very bad and it won't give you the result you want. Is that okay? So you should match the seam finishes with the kind of fabric you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a very heavy finishes, you should use a kind of seam which can really contain that kind of fabric. The same for the very light fabric, you use a kind of seam which cannot pull out the fabric. And then you have, the other thing is a use of garment. What the purpose of that garment? Is it for a special occasion? Is it for day-to-day activities? Is it for special one-time occasion? So if you want to once you know the use of the garment, you're going to use a kind of seam and seam finishes because you're going to consider the durability, the kind of knit, and the appearance of that seam on that garment. Okay. So once you know where am I going to use the garment, it will guide you to know which kind of seam to or seam finishes to use. Another is the care of the garment. Care is about the washing and handling. How are you going to wash? Are you going to use a machine? Are you going to use a hand wash? There are some seam or seam finishes. Once you use a machine wash, it's going to destroy the finishes, isn't it? And there are some kind of finishes which are very okay with both hand washing or machine wash. So it depends on the use of the garment, which will guide you on which kind of seam to use. And another thing is the location of the seam. Seam or seam finishes can be applied where the seam is. So if it is on the delicate area, it means you're going to know what kind of seam finishes to use. Or if it's an open area, you're going to know what kind of seam finishes to use. So if the seam is on the arm sack, it means you're going to use a kind of soft finishes which won't disturb the wearer, isn't it? Even the neckline, if you put a very bad kind of seam finish, it means it's going to distort the appearance of the garment, isn't it? So knowing the location of the seam will guide you or will enable you to know what kind of seam finishes to choose. And the sewing ability and skills. You cannot really just say I need a Hong Kong or a bond where you cannot make it. Sometimes we consider what you are capable of making for you to make it comfortably and to make it appropriately. Or sometimes you should be learning how to make different things and you learn the skills needed for that kind of thing. So the sewing ability and skills will also determine kind of seam finishes to be selected. And the final thing is equipment and tools available. You want a serging kind of seam finishes. We don't have a serge machines. What are you going to do? You opt what you can do with the available tools and equipment, isn't it? Yes. You don't have an overlock machine, but you want to finish your garment with an overlock. That is impossible, right? So you choose what you can make according to the available tools and equipment. Any questions? Is everything clear?
Yes.
Are you understanding?
Yes.
Okay. So you're going now to enter on the key of today's topic on the garment construction. The garment construction involves some stages, and you have to start with one stage to the final. You cannot start at the end or in the middle. You start with the very first stage. And this is a summary, but you are going to see each step in details. So by summary, this is the overview, which gives the first stage is a design and pattern making. This is where we start from the conceptualization and pattern development. This is the creation of concepts, functionality, target audience, and translation of pattern into the required sizes. This is what you're now thinking, the idea you have, and what you want to do, the functionality, the purpose of the garment you want, the nature of the pattern. So because this stage is what? Design and pattern making or ideation process stage. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Another stage, the second stage is fabric preparation and cutting. Once you have put your idea on the paper, you have now concluded, I want to make a dress, but not a blouse. And I want this work to be one maybe for the official purpose or on the special occasion. You have to know what kind of material or fabric am I going to use, isn't it? Yes. And then how am I going to cut this design? So this is the stage number 2, where the fabric is sometimes washed, and sometimes called the pre-treatment and cutting. Because there are some fabrics you cannot use them without treating them if they require some treatments. So you find out there are some fabrics, once you want to use it, you'll have to pre-treat them first for you to get the desired effect. So the fabric is sometimes washed, dyed or softened, then precisely cut according to the patterns using manual, automated, or laser cutting techniques. So this stage, once you decide nature of the fabric you want to use, you should know whether the fabric requires pre-treatment or not. If it requires treatments like a dyeing or washing or softened, you have to do that for the intended garment to have the same effect you are expecting. The other stage is a sewing and assembling. And we call this stitching, construction, detail, and assembling. In this stage is where you cut fabric pieces and sew together. Darts, pleats, and other shaping elements are stitched and pressed, then style detail like collar, cuffs, and pockets are added. The sewing and assembling is now what we'll be doing in the sewing room, of which you're going to join the pieces together. And then you're going to add features like a pocket, the collar, to make the final garment. Is that clear? And then once you join together, you assemble everything, you're going now to do the finishing and embellishment. The finishing and embellishment is sometimes called the pressing and embellishment. This is the process where the garments are pressed, often with a steam or to achieve a smooth and a professional finish. Decorative elements like a buttons, zipper, embroidery, and screen prints are added as per the design. You remember the word embellishments? This is where we add decorative features or any other functional features like a button, elastic, or zippers, isn't it? So under these finishing and embellishments is where now you're going to do the final pressing to remove any wrinkles and creases and add embellishment. And then quality control and packaging is where now you're going to see if every detail was done properly, the measurements were considered, and then the packaging, you pack it for the final consumption. Now you're going to see each step in detail and how it's done and how you're going to do, because after this topic, you're going to do your own garment construction activity and you're going to develop a simple garment using the same processes. So the garment construction phases. We say the garment construction phases, the garment construction has different phases. And in this topic, today we are going to learn 3 phases of which we are going to follow from the pre-production, production, and post-production. So you're going to see in detail what is going to be done in each phase. So garment construction involves transforming fabric into wear of fashion using a combination of pattern making, stitching, and finishing techniques. You've heard about pattern making, isn't it? You have seen the stitching and the finishing techniques. And so, the garment construction process largely consists of 3 phases. The pre-production, where we do the planning, the design, and the cutting. This entire process, we put them in a pre-production phase. And then we have the production phase, where we're going to do the sewing and the final finishing. And then the post-production, after you have assembled everything, you're going to do the quality inspection and final touches. So, you're going to first phase, which is a pre-production. Under pre-production, the design and pattern making, the process begins with a technical sketch and a tech pack. You have your idea in your mind, isn't it? For you to be able to communicate the idea, you have to sketch it out, isn't it? So you can sketch it on the paper using the freehand or a computer, or you can prepare something called a tech pack. Tech pack in the fashion field is where you prepare everything about the garment you're expecting to do, about the design, the fabric to be used, the color of the fabric, the texture. So you give a detail of everything you intend to do on that garment. So we call it a tech pack. So under this stage, you can use just a technical sketch, or you can prepare a tech pack. So once you communicate, you show a tech pack, it communicates what you want to do from the beginning to the end. So under this stage, you have 2 processes, the drafting and the grading. The drafting is creating on the initial pattern based on the body measurements, and the pattern markers translate this design into 2D templates. So as I told you, you draft a pattern using the measurements you want to be used for a certain garment. So if you're designing a garment for a certain person, it means you're going to use his or her measurement to draft a pattern. Is that clear? And if you design this pattern or you draft this pattern using a computer program, you'll have to translate into 2D template so that you can use it to cut the fabric. So if you design them in a computer, you're going to print them into papers and use the papers to cut the fabric. And then you have the grading. You remember the grading? It's where you're going to scale the pattern into various sizes. And different company or different country use different sizes mode or different standards of the sizing. There are those which use letters, like the small, medium, and L and XL. You know this, isn't it? There are those which use numbers starting from 6 to 18, and there are those which use numbers from 36 to 44 or 46. So it depends on which origin of the country and which kind of sizing numbers they use or sizing design. So the grading is we're going to use the first design the pattern to create different sizes from this very first one. Is that clear? Yeah. So this is how the pre-process is done. I told you the sketching you can do by hand or you can do by using a computer. So if you do like this, you can print this and communicate them or explain this using this picture. Or you can use a human body figure, we call them fashion figure, which is a human body avatar to trace the design you want. Or you can use a computer, which is CAD, computer-aided sketching, and then you can draft a pattern, or after drafting the pattern, you grade the pattern. You see that there are different colors here, isn't it? So these are different sizes from the same pattern. The original was this pinkish one, isn't it? So the grading has given us, maybe this was small, the yellow is medium, the other kind of light yellow is maybe large, the green is extra large, the blue is extra large. So we use, from this technology, you use only one size pattern to create various patterns, different sizes. Is that clear? And once it's done in the computer program, they normally give in different colors for you to see the sizes clearly. Any question? Is that clear? So you can now describe the pre-production? Okay. And then after you cut and you lay out, you grade the pattern and you decide which size you want, you're going now to lay a pattern and cut. Efficiency at this stage reduces fabric waste and ensures structural integrity. You have to be more precise, more careful, and you have to ensure that there is no fabric waste under this. So you're going to lay the pattern correctly and you're going to cut precisely. Under this laying and cutting, we have three things to observe or to do. We are going to lay out pattern. You're going to arrange the pattern pieces on the paper to maximize fabric yield. When you after you make your pattern, you have to lay the pieces to see whether every piece is there and how are you going to lay them on the fabric. So first thing, you lay them on the paper or on the table. It will give you a roadmap on how are they going to be laid on the fabric. And then you are going to do the spreading. The spreading is when you're going to lay out fabric piles smoothly to ensure even cutting. After you lay the pattern, you're going now to spread your fabric, and then you put the pattern pieces accordingly and properly for you to cut them accordingly and to maximize or to ensure the even cutting. And the last thing, you have the cutting. You're going to use the precision tools to cut the fabric following the markers. So if you're a beginner, we advise that when you put the pattern pieces, you secure them by pins or you just trace them by chalk, by tailor's chalk, for you to be able to cut the pieces accordingly. Is that okay? So for any beginner, you can use either pins to secure the pattern on the fabric, or you can trace them and then to cut according to the markers. Yeah, this is it. After you have made the pattern, you lie them on the table or on the paper to see how do they look like, and if every piece was made. Is that clear? And after that, you lie them, this is the spreading stage. You're going to spread the pieces on the fabric. So for any beginner, sometimes for the professionals or experienced, they can just cut the straight. For a beginner like you, you're going to secure them with the pins, or you're going to trace with a chalk, tailor's chalk, for you to be able to cut evenly and precisely. And then after that, you're going to cut by either the hand cut by using a scissor, or you're going to use a laser cutting technology where you're going to use a machine. Is that clear? And then after pre-production, you are now in the production stage or phase. Is that? So this is the heart of the construction. And where components are joined using various stitch and seam types. I told you, if you don't join the pieces together, that is not what? That is not a garment. It's just a fabric, isn't it? So under the production is where we're going to join the pieces together. And we're going to use a seam to join the pieces, isn't it? So under this, we're going to have to see 3 activities or 3 kind of approaches we're going to use to attain the production. So the workflow, the garments move through a line or a modular system. If it's industrial production, there is a production chain or a line, construction line, where you find some machines are arranged in a line, and there are some different professionals in each line. One is joining the seams, another is putting the collar, another is attaching the sleeve, another is putting the pocket. So you find a line, isn't it? So that's for mass production. But if it's for you as a beginner, or you're making for individual, a tailor, you can make it in just as a single kind of line. You just start by either joining the seam, and then you put the sleeve. So this is done by one person. It's different from when it is in the industry, where it's done by different professions. Is that clear? And then another thing is stitching. You choose the correct stitch class based on the fabric type and durability needed. You will choose another kind of stitch according to what you want to attain, or what the desired effect you want from the final garment. Do you want it to last longer? You choose the strong kind of stitch, or you want it to the stitching to be the functional and decorative, so you have to know, and so you'll use a different kind of threads, or you might go for contrasting or matching, depends on what you want to be the final. And then interfacing. This is the additional structure to the collars, scarves, and plackets. So the interfacing may add strength where it's needed. There are some parts of the garment which needs more strength than the other. For example, on the collars, on the placket, on the back for the yoke, we need interfacing. Interfacing is additional material on the fabric, which make it a layer. So we make it layered for durability and for the strength, because these are the most of the areas which requires more, or they need strength because of the strain they get from the movements or just wearing. So the workflow, I told you, from the design to the fabric to the layering. Other can start from the design, they make a pattern, they just cut, they sew, they press, they transport, they consume. Other they start from the designing, they make pattern, they interface if they have different features to be interfaced. Others they do layering, they cut, they edge seam, or they do fusing. Fusing is when you add extra layer, and then do you see these are in line? Because these 41 cannot be changed. You have to sew, you have to press, you have to transport, you have to consume. But the above one can be, you can skip one if it's not really necessary, or you can have it. So it depends on the desired effects you want. You can skip one of these if it's not really necessary for the kind of outfit you're making. But from here and below, you cannot skip anyone. Is that clear? And then from here, the interfacing. Interfacing are of two kind of categories. We have the fusible interfacing and sewn-in interfacing. The fusible we use are iron, hot iron to put them, to stick them on the fabric. They have a one side with a glue and another thing without a glue. So what you do, you make the glued face on the fabric and then you use a warm iron to stick it there. So when you put a warm iron on that fusing, the glue will melt and just stick on the fabric. This is what we see, the fusible interfacing. But the other kind of interfacing, they don't have glue. So what you do, you sew them on the fabric you join them using a stitch. You see the red marks? These are stitches, is there? So it depends on what is available or which one you prefer to use. You can use fusible or sewn-in interfacing. And then after there is stitching. We have a number of stitches, isn't it? You know them. So you can choose which kind of stitch to use depending on the nature of the garment or what you want to be the effect of the final garment. So you can choose this. Is there any question?
What did can I in those things?
What? This one?
No.
This one? What if you change? Obvious. You can start by pressing the pieces, but you have to sew them. You cannot skip sewing because without joining the pieces we're using stitch, it's not a garment. You cannot transport unless it's for you, but it's for somebody. You have to transport it, whether by he or she will come and take it to their home, or if it's for business, you'll transport to the market, isn't it? And then to be consumed. Consume is where you go to the market or to the shop and buy it. We consume. Consumer or consumption is a broader. You can consume by eating, you can consume by wearing. We call that term is a consumption. Another question? Okay. The production, we have a finishing. These steps ensure the garment meets retail standards. So we have the pressing. As I told you, remove the wrinkles and setting seams for a crisp finishing. We have a trimming where we remove loose thread. We're checking for defects and addition of trims and accessories. And we have labeling. Labeling is adding labels that contain details of the garment and care instructions. Any garment, unless it's for a local tailor construction or tailored made, but any garment which was bought from the shop or which was a ready-made from the industry has a label on it. And that label gives you the information about nature of the fabric, the care instruction label, and even the handling procedure or the handling advice. There are some symbols which show do not maybe tumble, it's only for dry cleaning, or do not dry cleaning, it's only for hand washing or for machine washing, or you can iron at this temperature. So the care lab gives information about the detail. So from today onwards, if you have any garments with a label, please go read what is it communicating. And sometimes it has a brand and the country of origin. So next session when we meet, everyone is going to tell us what kind of the label was on his or her garment and what details were in the label. And so this is the finishing. You have to press, and we say the basics is press as you sew. Every seam you do, you have to press it for it to lie flat and look neat, isn't it? And then you put embellishments. This the trims. You put the zipper, the rivet, the buttons, the elastic or the motifs, and then you put a label. You see? After this is the finishing process. And then you have the post-production. The post-production is the final inspection and packaging before the garment is ready for distribution. You ensure if the measurements were done correctly, if the garments were really, if they appear nicely, there is no any stain, there is no any hanging thread, and then you pack them. In this stage, we call a post-production phase. Any question? Have you ever experienced such a thing in the shop? Have you ever bought a garment packed like this? Or sometimes in the box, isn't it? So remember, this was the final process. But the same garment you bought in this, it went through all processes, from the ideation to this final process. Safety and hygiene practices in garment construction. We learned about the sewing room, isn't it? We saw the characteristics of a good sewing room. And we learned about the sewing machines. We learned there are those who are using electricity and those who are manuals, isn't it? And we saw that in a sewing room, there is electricity kind of installment, isn't it? So we need safety and hygiene. We saw the kind of tools. They are sharp tools, isn't it? They are those which contain, they require electricity to be operated. So we need really a safety precautions and hygiene to handle them. So the safety practices it starts from the machinery to the person who handles or who works in the sewing room. So machinery and equipment safety. All machinery such as a sewing machine and cutting instruments should be regularly inspected, maintained, and fitted with the safety guard and emergency stop buttons. Do you remember what you saw from our sewing room? How the electricity was installed from the ceiling? And you saw there is a red kind of, the knob containing the wires. Those were considered as a safety in the sewing room. Because if you put the bare cables like that, it's easier for you to be affected by electricity or any short. But when you're doing this, you make sure that the safety guards and emergency stop buttons or they're regularly maintained and fitted with the safety guards. So what you saw from our sewing room, how the electricity was installed from the ceiling, those were among the safety guards. Another thing is a fire safety. The garment factory must have robust fire safety protocol, including functional fire alarms, extinguishers, and clear and unobstructed emergency exit routes. It's a plan or it's recommended for any sewing factory or any garment factory to have a fire controlling or fire management equipment. Because when you're dealing with the fabrics and the electricity in the same time, it's obvious that fire can happen anytime if anything happens, isn't it? So it's advised to have a fire alarms. So once the fire comes, there had to be automated alarms to inform either the management or the security that there is a fire. And then there is extinguishers. We learned this. There are different fire extinguishers, isn't it? From the powder, the sun, and the wood. And then we have emergency exit routes. Any sewing or any garment factory should not have one exit or one entrance. Should have multiple, and we should construct emergency exit. So this can be pulled out any time of emergency. And this has to be standby all the time. And that's why it has to be called emergency, because it has to be ready to be used at any time of emergency. And then you have electrical safety. The electrical system should be properly installed, insulated, grounded, fused, and regularly inspected to prevent electrical hazards. As I told you how the electricity was insulated or was installed and insulated, did you see any bare wire? They were insulated with a certain of plastic kind of knobs, isn't it? Those are for fire safety because they don't want anybody to be damaged, to be affected, or when you just step on it, it won't because it's already protected. And then ergonomics. Ergonomics is about creating the comfortable environment of the person working in the sewing room. So the workstation should be designed to promote correct posture and minimize strain from repetitive tasks or prolonged sitting or standing. The sewing chair should be designed in such a way that if you sit for a long time, you won't feel strained. The sewing room or the garment construction will be designed in such a way that there is no strain from when you do something frequently. You won't be really get tired because of the environment. And it's also when you stand or you're sitting for a long time, you won't be strained. So that's about ergonomics. Or if you sew for 5 hours, you should not really feel strained on your back because the chair should really abide on the ergonomics and should support your back. Though it's not allowed to sew more than 3 hours consecutively. You should stand and do some movements to stretch the back. Is that clear? And then hazardous substances. Chemical used in the processes like fabric treatment must be stored, handled, and labeled correctly. There are some, like when you make a batik, there are some chemicals which resemble like salts. There are others which are colorless, and there are even others are odorless. So they should really be labeled for a person interacting with that to know what is that. Is that clear? So never ever leave any chemical unlabeled or unhandled because it may cause any damage. And then needle and sharp tool control. Strict protocols for managing sharp tools and needles are vital to prevent injuries and metal contamination in the final product. So all tools, needles with the sharp objects should be really managed to prevent injuries. So you should prepare a special place or a special container to put needles or scissors or any other sharp object so that you won't get any hazard. And if there is anything with a metal, you should really keep them safe in order to contaminate, to avoid contamination with the final product. The hygiene. Hygiene is on the personal as well as on the environment as well. The personal hygiene, employer or any person working in the garment construction or in the sewing room for our setting should encourage and provide facilities for regular hand washing with soap and water, especially before eating or after handling chemicals. Even at our setting in our sewing room, we have a sink at the back. Do you know it? And we normally put a soap. So after you handle the fabric and everything, before you go back to your dormitory, you have to wash your hand by soap because you've interacted with the fabric, which was pre-treated. You don't know which chemical was used, isn't it? You have touched the machine, which has oils and all. So it's better, or it's advised to ensure personal hygiene by washing your hands regularly. And then workwear and PPE. PPE is a personal protective equipment. So appropriate PPE such as gloves, masks, and safety goggles should be provided to mitigate risk associated with chemical, dust, or sharp objects. So in any sewing room or any factory, the owner or the management system or any person working or controlling should really provide the PPE or the workwear. And that's why, when you are interacting with the sewing machine, we normally encourage you to put shoes and what? Laboratory coats, isn't it? That's among the workwear and PPE. So sometimes you're going to wear a thimble on your finger when you're going to do hand stitching. The thimble is among the PPE because the thimble will prevent you from stitching on your finger. And then workplace cleanliness. The factory must maintain clean and tidy environment with adequate waste management system to dispose of fabric scraps and other debris. So you're going to make sure that the facility you're working on, it's always clean. And if you work comfortably, you work professionally and you work appropriately and effectively, isn't it? So the personal hygiene or the hygiene practices are the key for a proper working environment. And then welfare facilities, adequate and clean sanitary and washing facilities must be available for all workers, stocked with necessary supplies like soap and toilet papers. And then ventilation and lighting. You remember the basic requirement for the sewing room? Ventilation and lighting. You cannot work in a dark area or in inappropriate lighting because you end up doing the wrong stitch or you might end up injuring yourself. So the ventilation is required for you to breathe and to work comfortably, but lighting is for you to see clear. So the workplace should have sufficient lighting and adequate ventilation to maintain proper air quality, minimize eye strain, and promote general well-being. So another is product safety. The hygiene extends to the final product, ensuring it is free from contamination like broken needles, restricted chemicals, and properly packed and labeled with care instruction to maintain cleanliness during storage and transportation. You see the importance of labeling? It even informs how the product will be transported and how it will be consumed. And then the conclusion about the safety and hygiene is the first aid and medical facilities. You see from the pictures a kind of hazardous environment or accidents which might happen in any factory. So the first aid and medical facilities, they promote access to first aid and medical facilities is crucial for the well-being of workers. You should have a first aid because anything happens like injuries or what, you should really access a first aid before going to the hospital, or others can be managed within a factory without going to the hospital if it's a minor thing, isn't it? Another thing is a training and education. Comprehensive health and safety training is a cornerstone of the ensuring a safe work environment in the garment industry. You should train workers. You should train newcomers. You should train even the expertise. You should remind them about the safety. So every time you get a new person in the industry, you should orient them on the safety procedures or safety practices to avoid what? Any injuries or any damage. So regular training programs should be provided to all employees, including new hires and contractors. Sometimes the factory hire people for a short time on contract basis. So even if it's a contractor, you should train them on the safety practices. So this marks the end of today's topic, but you're going to have a very nice kind of class activity on which you're going to follow all we have discussed, the entire process of the garment construction following 3 phases: the pre-production, the production, and post-production. So you're going to prepare a simple garment by following the entire process of garment construction. The task, you're going to identify the required tools and equipment, because you're going to start with the paper. You're going to write your idea and materials needed in the construction process or what you require. So this is start with the paperwork. So you're going to identify the required tools, you're going to write, and then you're going to demonstrate all the phases, stage to be involved. This you're going to write and do at the same time. So you write what the step was involved when you are doing this. And then after that, you're going to prepare a simple report of maximum 5 pages explaining the process, the challenges encountered, and how were they addressed or encountered. Is that clear? So you're going to create a simple garment of your own. And I limit this to just a dress and a blouse. So you choose between the two. So by following this, you're going to start with the ideation. We're going to get the sketches first. And I prefer this to be hand sketch. You're going to bring to me 2 designs, 2 ideas, and together I and you are going to choose one. So from that ideation, we are now going to the production. And then you're going to tell me what material do you require, kind of fabric, wider fabric, which kind of thread do you want. So you're going to do the paperwork, and the final, you're going to present in class your final garments and explain to us how was the process. You'll tell us how did you do it means the experience. What challenge did you encounter and how did you, what challenge did you face and how did you encounter them? Is that clear? Any question? Do you have any questions? Was today's topic clear? Yes. So the next topic is tomorrow, of which we are going to do the pattern drafting. So everyone should come with a brown paper and a pencil. We are going now to draft a pattern. We drafted 2 kinds of pattern, for a blouse and for a dress, for you to use the pattern to make the final garment for this class activity. Until next time, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Chuo Kikuu cha Sokoine cha kilimo SUA. SUA ni chuo kikuu bora na kikongwe cha kilimo nchini Tanzania.